glad you're here. I put a little fancy note in there. I'm sorry. You can do that too if you like. One more time. This time we know it. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. The fellowship is sweeter just knowing you're near. It's so good to see you. I hope that is clear. Everyone loves you. We're so glad you're here.
All right.
Shall we greet our neighbors?
So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome here to Unity in the heart of Austin. Hope everyone had a wonderful week. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on the parables of Jesus. We're not going to get to all of them, and I was reminded about that this morning as I was going through the notes and kind of like looking. As I mentioned last week, most of the parables that we know principally come from the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There are no parables per se in the book of John, which is more concerned with the cosmic nature of the Christ in its overall story. There are also some parables that show up in the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the so-called lost Gospels that didn't make the final cut for the New Testament, so we can also research those. But as I was looking through the list and everything this week, and especially this morning as I was putting this together, I was reminded we could continue talking about parables for like a long, long time. A lot of these parables, including one of the ones that we're going to be dealing with here today, are worthy of their own talks. There's that much stuff to unpack within some of these, just one parable sometimes, that you could do a whole talk around that. Most of the parables that we're going to be dealing with in the context of this series, including last week, this week, and 2 weeks from now, are mostly coming from Matthew and Mark. Luke has a whole list of parables, and Luke, as you recall, was one of the Gospels that was not written by an immediate apostle, not one of the 12 apostles. Mark was not one of the 12 apostles either. So really only Matthew and John among the Gospels were actually apostles, and of course Thomas, which wound up in the lost Gospels as well. And so as I was looking through the list, I was like, wow, here's another good story, but it's not really fitting our theme. And the theme that we're doing here over the 3-week period here is we're talking in general about how these parables can still have practical value in our lives. I mean, what good does it do to sit around and tell stories, especially stories that were told, more than 2,000 years ago, and sharing these culturally through the centuries and everything down to today, if they don't have actual practical value in our lives? Like, what can we glean from these stories per se, and how can we apply it in our lives? And you'll recall in Unity's principles, the 5th principle is what? It's like our action principle. Mm-hmm. And to sort of paraphrase the 5th principle in Unity is like these other 4 principles that come before it, they don't really mean anything. They don't really have any power or efficacy in our lives unless we're willing to live that truth, unless we're willing to put those into action. And so the parables help us to see these stories, and it's not just Jesus or someone who's telling the parable says, hey, here's the lesson of the parable, Jim, just do this. Right? Well, Jim would go, okay, well, that might make sense, but then, he'd be on down the road. So why did Jesus speak in parables? And we talked about three of those reasons last week as to why Jesus used parables, and one of them was just to give his enemies no grounds for offense against him, right? So he spoke in these stories, so he wasn't saying directly what he was saying, so they would have nothing to convict him on, so to speak. They were just stories, right? The other one was and one of the 2 others was to enlighten the true-hearted. In other words, if y'all have heard that phrase before, let those that have ears hear and let those that have eyes see. It's appealing to that true-hearted spiritual person walking in that if you're truly, truly willing to have the truth come into your heart, then you're open and receptive. If you're not willing for the truth to come in and upset your apple cart, you're going to be closed off to it. And so Jesus understood this, that I'll tell these parables, I'll teach these lessons and so forth, but they're not going to land with everyone. Right? There's only going to be some that are landed. Remember last week we talked, one of the parables that we dissected last week was about the sower and the seed, and the different kinds of ways that we can sow our seeds and the different kinds of conditions. And there was really only one of those four conditions that he talked about that was planting it in fertile soil to where it would actually grow and prosper and so forth. And so that's what we're doing. That fertile field is the equivalent to the activity of our own consciousness, our thinking and feeling nature, right? Our work is to prepare the soil of our consciousness so that we're only allowing the good seeds to be planted. Now, does anybody do this perfectly? If you have, let me go ahead and take your seat, and you can come on up here and tell us how to do that, because the truth is we all sow our seeds in all four of those ways. Sometimes we just spill the seeds of our potential just spill them. They just fall out of our pockets or whatever the case may be. And sometimes we're planting them in thorns, and sometimes in shallow soil where they don't get to take root and everything. And then every once in a while, as the old saying goes, even a blind squirrel finds a nut. That sometimes we plant those seeds in fertile soil, and then we get the fruits and rewards of doing that. So our purpose here in dissecting these parables and everything is to prepare ourselves in consciousness. What are the good seeds, so to speak, that I should plant in the activity of my thinking, and allow those to take root, so to speak, and flourish in the garden of my own consciousness. The third reason why he would do that was just to make us think. What does he mean by that? What does he mean by the sower and the seed, for example? Well, in one of the parables that we're going to be talking about today is that sort of separating, the wheat from the weeds, so to speak. The apostles actually asked Jesus about that specific parable, and they asked him, said, hey, what do you mean by that? So I'm going to read this. This actually comes from Matthew 13, verses 34 and 35. And Jesus told the crowd all of these things in parables for those reasons that we talked about. And without a parable, he told them nothing. So he only kind of spoke in these parables. This was to fulfill what had been spoken to the prophet Isaiah. And it's a quote, I will open my mouth to speak in parables. That was one of the prophecies of Isaiah. And I will proclaim what has been hidden since the foundation of the world. So in this respect, Jesus is going back to those eternal truths that are not subject to circumstance or the changing of political winds or economic, uncertainty or whatever the case may be. These are the truths that were around since the foundation of the world. So they were true then, before anything happened. They're true now, and they'll be true if and when this is all over with, so to speak. Those truths will still be true, right? That's the capital T truth, not just what I think is true in my own personal perceptions, my own personal opinion. Oftentimes in our world nowadays, opinion passes for truth or attempts to pass for truth. And all of us fall short of that. I think I said last week at some point in time, referencing the Course in Miracles, that one of the ideas in the Course in Miracles about judgment, and judgment is going to be one of the powers that we're dissecting today in the themes here today. And the Course in Miracles says that I must give up judgment, not because I'm bad or I'm sinning when I'm judging. I must give up judgment because I am completely incapable of perfect judgment. I'm completely incapable, no matter how blessed I might be, that there's always more truth that's potentially available to me in any circumstance. And that as soon as I start projecting my opinions or perceptions into the world and everything, necessarily those are limited. They don't take into account that larger truth. So knowing that I must give up judgment, so to speak, the kind of righteous judgment I'm talking about here, not right judgment, right? The reason I must give that up is because I'm completely incapable of it. I'm going to fall short, so I must leave some room for other truth to potentially come in that might refine my truth, might clarify the truth that I think that I am speaking and do know. And it keeps us in a place of humility. And that place of humility also keeps us in that place of openness and receptiveness. That when we start closing ourselves off to that and we think we know what needs to be known, right? And that we've got it, right? Oftentimes I've found that anytime I began to insist that I had something mastered, oh, I got this down, God would usually bring a circumstance at me so quickly, like really I wouldn't even recognize that it was a response to that affirmation that I'd made, that I would usually fail the test, so to speak. because I didn't see it coming. So it keeps us in that openness, keeps us in that receptiveness. And I think the parables, and what Jesus is saying with parables is that by telling these stories, I will continue to think about them. Well, what does that mean? As opposed to if you just said, hey, only sow your seeds on fertile ground. Lucy, that's all you need to do if you just do that.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's all you need to do, right? We wouldn't remember those, but we'll think about the stories, and then we'll talk about them with others and say, well, what do you think he means about that? We can talk about it, and we keep parsing them out. So that's the power of speaking in the parables. So what we're up to here in terms of the overall 3 parts of this series is that we're setting about the task of cultivating the kingdom of heaven within the activity of our own thinking, within the activity of our own conscience. Because where is the kingdom of heaven? Within. The kingdom of heaven is within. It's not out there, and it's not a destination that we're going to that's someplace remote from us. It is right here, right now, present. Just like the one power and the one presence is right here active with us right now, so is the kingdom of heaven. We set the conditions for that within the activity of our thinking. And in A Course in Miracles language, it's that choice that we're constantly making between love and fear. Love and fear. Love and fear. That if I'm thinking in the activity of my thinking, I'm thinking on love, and I'm attempting to cultivate love in there, then I'm bringing a harmonious energy, not only to the activity of my own thinking, but also into the circumstances of all my relationships, and so forth. Conversely, if I'm cultivating fear, then I'm going to be cultivating separation, the kind of judgment that's the bad judgment, so to speak. One of the ideas also, and it comes from A Course in Miracles, is that the kingdom of heaven is incomplete unless everyone is included in that. So if I'm a holdout, if I'm the lone holdout, I'm over here insisting upon my right to self-determination and making up my own way, and I'm a holdout from heaven, and the rest of y'all have got it. If y'all are in heaven, then you're not really judging me, you're actually praying for me, so that I can get it, so that I can then join into the heaven that already exists, and then I'm the one keeping the separation in place by holding myself out. So that's sort of a master theme that we're working on here, is cultivating that kingdom of heaven. We want to find out. Today we're going to be talking about the divided kingdom and what that looks like, the parable of the divided kingdom. And I got to tell y'all, man, when I was looking at this closer, especially this morning as I was preparing my final notes for this and everything, I realized that that divided kingdom idea, the parable of the divided kingdom, the language that is used to articulate that in the book of Matthew and everything was like, wow, man, you want to talk about push some of my buttons this morning? I was like, should I use that? Because there's an alternative version in Mark. I could use that, and it's phrased a little, a little less. What's the word I'm looking for? Confrontational. Yeah, it didn't push as many buttons in Mark, and I almost made that choice that I'll just use the Mark reference as opposed to the Matthew reference. But then I was like, no. If it's pushing my buttons, maybe that's the message, that we should take a closer look at what is pushing our buttons as it relates to it. But before we get to that, I want to just quickly recap that last week we talked about the power of faith was sort of our overarching power, one of our 12 powers to it. And we talked about the faith of the mustard seed, right? We also talked about the parable of the lamp. We don't want to hide our light away. We don't want to put our lamp under a bushel basket, right? And then we did talk about the sower and the seed, which I've already kind of mentioned here. And then we talked about the talents, right? And the talents, as you know, was a unit of money back then, a unit of currency. But we can also use that word talents to how are we employing our divine talents, our divine gifts. So even though Jesus is couching that in the context of an economic parable with relationship to money, that word talents evokes something else for us in our modern sensibility. So I'm to give my gifts. I'm not to hide my light under a bushel basket, right? And I'm to sow my seed on fertile ground. And we were talking about the power of faith as the overarching power that related to all those last week. That the power of faith is our perceiving power. It's the power that allows us to perceive potential before it comes into manifestation. We often think of, having faith in something, right? Where are you placing your faith? I believe, from my experience, that we actually have perfect faith. We actually have perfect faith. The variable is, in what are we placing our faith? One way to look at this in sort of an extreme way is that, even an addict has faith in his drug of choice. And he places his faith in that this is what I need for my salvation. But we all know that an addiction can be deleterious to our experience. It can work against our good, so to speak, as long as we're involved in the addiction, right? So, but if I place my faith there instead of placing my faith rightly in truth principles and so forth, then I'm going to get the consequences and effects of where I'm placing my faith. But the faith of the addict is just as perfect as someone who places their faith in the truth. The power of faith operates perfectly, and we will get the rewards and consequences of the fact about where we are, in what are we placing our faith. So today we're going to be talking about the power that we're going to be evoking today. Primarily, is the power of judgment. Now, I don't like the word judgment. I don't like the word judgment to that, because that's a loaded word, isn't it? There's a lot of negative connotations that come up when we say judgment. That's a word that's used against people who speak the truth a lot of times, that they're righteous in their judgment, right? I like the word discernment better. It's a higher vibrational word than judgment. But Charles does talk about discernment. That's one of the qualities when Charles is talking about. Actually, Charles talks about the power of judgment synonymously with the power of wisdom. And I don't think that wisdom is a power per se. That wisdom is an application, right? It's an application. We don't have the power to wise, right? That's not a, that sounds like something from The Princess Bride, I think, a little bit. The way they talk about that. We don't have the power to wise, but wisdom is that sort of ability to foresee consequences before we choose, and then to choose in alignment, with that wisdom, with that truth, whether it's based on experience or something that we know to be true because, we've learned it elsewhere. But usually, wisdom is going to come more so from us as we mature and go through the laboratory of life experience. We're going to learn through trial and error. An easy one is, if I put my hand on a fire, I burn myself. So it would be wise for me not to put my hand in the fire again. So that's the ability to foresee consequence, but I might have learned it because I burned myself before, right? If you hadn't burned yourself, how would you know what that experience is? Oh, don't put your hand in the fire, Debbie. You're going to burn yourself. Well, what does that mean, Rick? I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Okay. Now Debbie has wisdom and she knows not to put her hand in the fire, right? So that's what wisdom is. So it's that discernment, that power of discernment, is allowing us to sort that out. Now, in the context of the 12 powers, judgment. Let me back up a little bit. Wisdom, which is the word that Charles uses primarily for this particular power, wisdom was associated with the apostle James, and there was 2 Jameses in the 12 apostles. But this was James, the brother of John, and John is the apostle that stands for the power of love. We're going to be talking about that one next week. Okay, so love and wisdom kind of travel together. Last week we talked about faith, and that's attributed to the apostle Peter, who had a brother named Andrew, and Andrew is associated with the power of strength. So that power of faith and the power of strength coupled together. That power of strength is our ability to persevere, to endure through circumstances and so forth. So faith and strength are linked together, and they're represented by 2 brothers. And love and wisdom, or love and discernment, are represented by 2 brothers. Those 2 pairs of brothers, they were the first 4 apostles that were gathered up. Y'all might remember the story that Andrew and James were the first ones that came across Jesus, and they brought John and Peter to the party, so to speak. Peter was also called Simon at that point in time, right? So faith and strength, those are linked, and love and wisdom, or discernment, are linked. We'll talk about love more next week. We're going to be talking about judgment this week, but I want to talk about judgment and add another power into this mix. I believe that the power of judgment, discernment, is linked to another power. That's the power of understanding. And that the power of understanding is more of an intuitive power. It's the ability for us to not only understand what is happening, what is going on, how to apply spiritual principles, right? It helps us to understand that. But it's also drawing from that intuitive field. It's an intuitive power, whereas the power of discernment is a rational reasoning process. So it's the coupling of those two together. That it's one thing for me to reason out something over here, but absent the understanding, I can get no meaning from it. I can just know A plus B equals C, yeah, but what does that mean? It's the power of understanding that helps us to glean meaning from our experience, helps us to bring meaning to our lives. But we're going to be talking about more about the discernment aspect of it here today, and as I said, that's the reasoning power. It's a rational thinking power. Unity's third principle says what? We're co-creating this experience by the activity of our thinking and feeling natures, the activity of thinking that we are maintaining in the activity of our consciousness. The world is not forcing us to think a certain way. The world is what it is. And if we bring that into our judgment and we keep that divorced from our power of understanding, then we're up here just playing in a reasoning process, and we're disconnected from that intuitive process that allows us to understand these truths, to bring meaning into our lives. So we're y'all do know this has probably been discussed before, I'm sure, but we're the 12 powers, so to speak, and Charles also points out that 12 powers may not be the only powers. He left room for additional powers to be identified as we go along, so to speak. But that the 12 powers are meant to operate in harmony with one another. They're not separate things. That if we're just keeping our judgment and we're processing in our reasoning process, but we're keeping it divorced from our love, for example, what's that going to look like? Then it's going to look like righteous judgment. It's going to be reinforcing separation. It's going to be judging people, right, rather than discerning kinds of things. So in respect to the power of judgment, we want to like neutralize that word, okay? Neutralize that word so that we don't have that charge that we have on it, because in its right sense, it's meant to be right judgment, right? So as we go through this and we're gleaning meaning, so we're going to come down to in the third unity principle that we're co-creating this experience here. How's that going for you? Right? What does that look like? Are you choosing between love and fear? And let me answer that for you. Yes, you are. Nobody does this perfectly. Nobody does this perfectly. So we're all going to have those places where some experience is going to happen, some information is going to come to us that's going to be unsettling to our peace, to our circumstances whatsoever, and we're going to be reacting to that in fear. We can always neutralize that experience by bringing love back into the equation, but we're always oscillating back and forth between these two polarities, right? So just be aware of that. So the next time you find yourself buying into fear or judgment or any other attendant experiences that come along with that, you don't judge yourself in the process. You can just do what the Course in Miracles says, is choose again. Just choose again. Release the judgment. Don't shame yourself, right? I've chosen wrongly. I know I've chosen wrongly because I'm not at peace. That's the simple litmus test. That if I am not at peace for any reason, I have chosen wrongly. If I want to be at peace, I must do what? Choose again. Okay, so this first parable that we're going to be talking about today is the divided kingdom. Now remember, our overarching theme here for all three of these weeks of talks here is to prepare ourselves in consciousness for that unity of the kingdom within. So we're going to be talking about starting off today's talk with the parable of the divided kingdom. And I want to say up front, as I said a minute ago, the language in here might push some buttons. You might feel yourself being triggered by some of the language that's being used here. I did try to, as a result of a conversation that Jim and I had last week after the service, I realized that the scriptures that I was using last week had not come from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible that Unity typically uses. So this morning I went to those to pull those verses up, so we'll be using that. But even given that, this is still pretty tough here. So this comes from Matthew chapter 12, verses 24 through 30. And I'm just going to read through it, and then we'll kind of tease it out a little bit. So at this point in time, right before these verses happen, what's been going on is the Pharisees are attempting to sort of try and convict Jesus, because Jesus had been healing the sick and more importantly, casting out demons, right? And so the Pharisees had a real charge on, by whose authority are you, casting out these demons? So that was the entry point for this parable of the divided kingdom. So here's where it goes. But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, "It is only by Beelzebul, the ruler of the demons, that this man cast out the demons." Jesus, he knew what they were thinking and said to them, "Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and no city or house divided against itself will stand." Well, that makes sense, right? If Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand? See, so when we tease that out in our discernment and our judgment, it goes, well, that makes sense. Why would Satan give Jesus the power to cast out demons if it's going to be weakening his own plan, right? So he points that out to him. Well, the Pharisees kind of bristle at that a little bit, because that's like calling them out for what their game is. If I cast out demons by Beelzebul, if it's true what you say that I'm casting out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your own exorcists cast them out?
Ew.
Whoa, Pharisees are really upset now. They're really upset. Therefore, they will be your judges. But if it is by the Spirit of God that I cast out demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. Or how can one enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man? How can they rob you of your peace without going in and tying you all up in knots in your own reasoning process so that you can't see and find peace? So you imprison, bind up the strong man, and then you can plunder the house. Then indeed the house can be plundered if you're tied up. And then he concludes by saying this: whoever is not with me is against me, and I love this one, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. That brings up the sower and the seed, doesn't it? What seeds are you, how are you gathering? How are you gathering? If you're not gathering in truth, then you're scattering. You're scattering your energy. So we talked about that. The Pharisees were admonishing and looking for grounds to try and convict Jesus. And they are asking him, by what authority do you cast them out? So Jesus is playing that back to him, right? If you say that I'm doing it in the name of Satan, well, whose name are you doing it in? Right? So Jesus uses the Pharisees' own logic against them by pointing it out. He then questions by whose authority they cast out demons, right? If it's as you say, I am an agent of Beelzebul, right? If you're saying that you can only cast out demons in the name of Beelzebul, then okay, I'm that, and so are you. Well, they're going to bristle at that, right? But if it is by God's power that I cast them out, then the Pharisees will know that the kingdom of heaven is upon them, and if so, their days are numbered, right? Because the truth is going to ultimately well out. No one can enter the strong man's house and plunder it without first tying the man up. Whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. So you can parse that all out. That's a very, very powerful thing, and that's going to have resonance and continuing themes about, like, where are we? In America, just for example, here in America right now, are we a unified kingdom or a divided kingdom? It's pretty easy. It's pretty apparent to see that. But I would say that it's kind of always been that way, right? That the external world, the world out here, cannot usher in peace for us. Peace is an inside job, just like the kingdom of heaven is within. My peace is my responsibility. My peace, Lissy can't make me be at peace. She can demonstrate her peace. She can embody that and bring that to the party, so to speak, and I can be inspired by her experience of peace, or her expression of peace, I should say. And it might make me curious, hey, Lissy, what are you doing? Like, how can, we're both in the same world going through these same conditions, but you seem to be at peace. Tell me about that, right? So we can embody that, and we can be an example to others, but we must first till the soil of our own consciousness. We must make that field fertile, and so forth. We must unify our own kingdom of heaven within before we can embody that in the world, right? So it's unity principle number 3. There, it's right there in our face, that I'm co-creating this experience by the thoughts and the feelings that I am allowing in the activity of my thinking and feeling nature. No one's in charge of that but me. I guess in an extreme situation, they could probably shock therapy me or something or like that. Or, but even if they put me away and imprisoned me, they would still have no power over the activity of my own thinking. That's the place that's ultimately inviolate. So I have to take charge of that. I have to take responsibility for that. And it's my experience, my belief, that it's the avoidance of accepting personal responsibility for our experience that is at the root of all of our problems. Yeah. Because if we would step into owning and taking personal responsibility for our experience, that's the equivalent of taking responsibility for our power as well. And that there's nothing out here that can disturb my peace unless I first volunteer. When I was doing a lot of personal growth work back in the 90s and retreats and everything, someone said, y'all probably have heard this in one way or another, that there are no victims, there's only volunteers. Have y'all heard that one before?
Yeah.
Right? That if like something may happen to me, that someone could cast a story, I could even cast a story that I was a victim to these circumstances and everything. If I continue telling that story, that I was victimized by this, every time I tell that story, I'm continuing to feel the experience of being a victim. That I must change my language, I must change my thinking first, obviously, change my thinking before the language changes so that I can gain my power back. And it's for a lot of people, it's really uncomfortable sometimes for them to let go of the victim story. Mm-hmm. It's really uncomfortable because what's on the other side of that? Well, if I let go of my victim story and I'm no longer victimized by this circumstance and everything, then what? Then what? Then the real work begins. But we're not alone in that work. That once we set our intention correctly, we get in alignment back with those truth principles, all manner of aid comes to our assistance. We're not alone in this process, but we have to choose heaven. You're going to see heaven or hell depending upon the choices that you make. And the truth is, we've all probably seen both, and probably will again, maybe even before the day's over, right? Because we're the ones choosing, and you will see what you choose. I've just thought about this. There's something about I'll believe it when I see it. Y'all have heard that one before? Mm-hmm. I'll believe it when I see it. And somebody turned that upside down one time. It's like, I'll see it when I believe it. Mm-hmm. You flip that on its head, that when I believe that the kingdom of heaven is within, when I believe that, then I'll begin to see. Mm-hmm. Right? So we must believe it first. That's our faith, the power of our faith, the perceiving power, as we talked about last week, that allows me to get in touch with that. So what would keep me from rightly judging, from rightly discerning? And this is one of my favorite parables. It's a really, really good one. I use it all the time in conversation and everything. usually as a way of expressing my own humility. And if I catch myself in that state of being righteous in my judgment, mm-hmm. right? And it's the parable of the log in the eye, right? Oh. The speck and the log in the eye. So this also comes from Matthew 7, 1-5. Do not judge so that you may not be judged. For the judgment you give will be the judgment you get. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. We've learned that in prosperity, in our give and receive kind of thing, right? Except the law of prosperity says I get 10 times more back than what I give. So that seems like a better deal to me. Right? It seems like a much better deal, as opposed to judgment where it's going to come right back to me. And however judgmental I am of others in judging them, then that's going to come right back to me. And how am I going to know it's coming back to me? Because I won't be at peace. That's just that's like, as I said, that's the litmus test. How's your peace doing? If you are at peace, then you can be pretty well assured that you're consistently choosing in the right direction. You're consistently choosing from your love as opposed to from your fear. Because as soon as we venture off into the fear aspect, peace is the first thing that's mortgaged. It's the first thing that goes out the window. So as soon as I've stepped off that ledge and I'm no longer feeling peace, I can know from experience I've chosen wrongly. I've chosen in a sense of separation. I've chosen from my fear, from my limited sense of myself. And if I want to be at peace, I must choose again, as A Course in Miracles reminds us. Now, the parable of the log in my eye, it's really, really worthy, right? It goes on to say, why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? I would say, how can I even see the speck in your eye with a log in my eye? That's another way of looking at it. Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye while the log is in my own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. This whole little parable here is really talking about our judgment, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Right? I've got something that's blinding me, not allowing me to see correctly. It's impairing my vision. But yet I'm insisting that I'm seeing perfectly and that I can perfectly judge. No, let's go. Let's get that log out of my eye. Oh, let me look again. Mm-hmm. I see things differently because I don't have that obstruction in my place. So I love that one. I've gotten a lot of value out of that particular parable over the course of time. And like I said, when I catch myself in that judging personality of mine, right? When I find myself, it's like, oh wow, here, let me remove this log here. Let me lay that down here. Oh wow, what I thought was a log in your eye, Debbie, is actually just a little speck. Let me get that little eyelash out of your eye. There we go. See, I can see more clearly to do that then. And I'm doing it in love at that point in time, rather than being righteous in my own judgment. So once again, continuing this theme of judgment and discernment, the next parable we're going to take a look at is the parable of the weeds among the wheat. And this is another really, really good one. It's actually not really long, but it's a little bit more involved than the speck and the log in my eye. So this comes also from Matthew. This is Matthew 13:24 through 30. And Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, do you want us to go and pull them up? Do you want us to go pull these weeds up? And the man answered, no, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then go and gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. Any gardeners in here? Anybody ever done some gardening before? That's kind of worthy advice sometimes, right? Especially with new sprouts and everything. I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a weed that's sprouting or something that's good in that early period of it. But if I let it grow up and everything mature, oh, that's the good plant there. I can now clearly see the good plant. Now I can go pull the weeds out. So once again, we're getting back to that power of judgment and discernment, that right thinking, that right discernment and everything. But if I act too early in my haste and my fear that I've done something wrong, I'm going to make the situation worse. So this is one of those things where after they got back to camp, Jesus had been talking all day long and doing all kinds of things at this point in time. They get back to camp, so to speak. The disciples asked him, hey, what's this deal with the weeds, right? So he says, then he left the crowds and he went into the house. Jesus actually gives us the answer about why he speaks in parables. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples approached him, saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. And he answered just straight up. He broke it down for them, did a nice little metaphysical breakdown. He answered, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. So just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. Once again, some of this language taps into my old Catholic orientation. I get all wiggy about this stuff. It's like those are some pretty harsh imagery, right? It sort of reinforces the idea about, hellfire and all those kind of things that kind of, well, if that's the way it is, I don't want to align with that. But it's not really that in reality. But have you ever felt the experience of hell in your own consciousness? Have you ever felt that sense of separation, that sense of powerlessness, right, that comes along with that? And it's oftentimes when we're at the peak of that feeling of powerlessness, when we're way out on the skinny limbs, that's usually when we cry out to something else, because we can recognize in that moment, I've made a mess of this, right? I don't know how to get out of this. I need help. I mean, that's almost the first step in the 12-step program, isn't it? Like, I have made a mess and I need some help here. I need to trust in a different power than the power that I've been trusting in. I need capital P power, not the little ego P power. My own sense of power. Dr. David Hawkins would call that sense of power force. Like, he makes that distinction between those two energies. Force is coming from fear, and power comes from love. So if I'm feeling shame, guilt, apathy, if I'm feeling suicidal, if I'm getting all up in my own sense of pride, then that's the energy of force. I'm choosing from the energy of force. And when I start ascending up in that map of consciousness, as Dr. Hawkins says, we start getting to courage. Courage is the first place where we begin accessing, not necessarily accessing, but actually demonstrating and expressing love. And for those of you etymologists in here, you might recall that the word courage, the root word of the word courage, comes from an old word that means heart. So that's when the courage is when we start beginning to come from our heart. And of course, the heart is a archetype symbol of love, right? So it's that first place when we begin to overcome that. Dr. Hawkins has mapped out the activity of the world, the collective consciousness of the world, and at the time that he calculated it, we were resonating just a little above, collectively, the energy of courage. So we're demonstrating the energy of courage, but that's also that number, so to speak, that vibrational number, is the composite of ascended energies, enlightened energies, all the way up the chain, unconditional love and reason, and it's also factored in with fear and separation and shame and guilt and all the other kinds of energies that we can demonstrate. So we wonder, well, if there's so many people out there who are mired in fear, separation, desperation, hopelessness, how come the wheels don't just fall off? How do we keep going? How we keep going is because the power of love is exponentially greater than the energy of fear. It's calculated that one person resonating at the energy of unconditional love, just one person resonating at the energy of unconditional love, cancels out the fear and the energy of 1 million people. So if one of us in this room can manifest and embody that, to really be living your life in the activity of your thinking and feeling nature, that we can resonate with the energy of unconditional love, that's how we're keeping it together, because that one person cancels out, or I shouldn't say cancels out, neutralizes the energy of fear that others feel and express, right? So they say, y'all have heard this, I think somewhere, I can't remember exactly where it comes from. Jesus says something to the effect of, if I'm speaking to 1,000 people, one person will actually get it. One person out of 1,000 will actually really get this. If I'm speaking to 1,000 of those people that get it, only one of those will actually embody it. So that's where the 1 in a million comes from. 1 out of 1,000. So now we have to have 1,000 of those things to get 1 out of each of those 1,000 things to come up with 1,000 people who kind of get it. But only 1 out of those is going to embody that. So I say that to say this: in America, there's about 340 million people. So 1 out of a million equates to about 340 people. So is it hard to imagine that there might be 340 people in all of America that are resonating at the energy of unconditional love? When you break it down that way, it becomes really reasonable to assume that 340 of us out of 340 million have developed that ability to think and come from the energy of unconditional love. Most of those people wind up withdrawing from the world, don't they?
Yeah.
They wind up going into our monasteries or some sort of secluded life where they can maintain that, because going into the world, being connected with the world, it becomes a constant challenge to maintain that, because the assault of the world's energy to get us to buy into the world's premises is exhausting. It's exhausting. In Unity, we do what? Our 4th principle says, hey, go into silence. Take some time to withdraw from the world, right? And to go back into that private chamber, that inner chamber, and get connected back to source. So I think it's perfectly reasonable. In fact, I think there's more than 340 people that are resonating at that. But when you break it down to that 1 in a million idea is like, I absolutely believe there's at least 340 people that are resonating at that energy of unconditional love. I think I've met 1 or 2 of them along the way. People that just really embody that. You ever felt that before? You can feel like when somebody can walk into a room and you don't even know them, but you just like feel when they walk into the room, it's like all the attention and energy goes to that person because they just embody it. It's an energetic thing, and that energy doesn't have to be actually spoken to me. I can feel it across space and time. So that's our work. Like, we may not achieve it individually. We may not achieve that goal of resonating in unconditional love, but if I know what the goal is, I know how to calibrate myself in that direction, I stand a much better chance of arriving there than if I have no map to navigate, right? So if I know the goal is unconditional love, and that at the energy of unconditional love, I would know peace, because peace is an ascended energy. Peace is the result, the effect, the consequence of loving unconditionally. It's not a separate thing. If you're feeling peace, it's because you have developed the capacity to express unconditional love. Otherwise, you wouldn't get to a place of peace. The variable is, how long do we maintain our peace once we actually arrive at it? Because the world is constantly coming at us. And there's good reasons too. It's not a negative thing. If you choose fear, sometimes there's reasons for it, right? Like if I got a prognosis that I had a terminal condition, I guarantee you it would upset my peace. I would have to work through that. That's part of my process, part of my journey. But I guarantee it would test my peace. It would test my faith. It would test my belief in where my source is coming from. Is it the condition? And y'all heard those stories, I'm sure, about people who have spontaneous remission from cancers and things like that, and doctors are going, well, we don't really know why. Like, just kind of happened. Debbie just kind of, it's just no longer there, Debbie. Right? But Debbie might know what happened, because Debbie would know that something internally changed within her, where she placed her faith, and that power and that from our faith is going to overcome any condition in the world. So next week, or actually 2 weeks from now, we're going to be concluding this series, and I want to leave y'all with actually let me back up here just a second. I didn't complete this about Jesus breaking this thing metaphysically down about the weeds. So he says, no, I got all the way through it. Yeah, the reapers are angels. Yeah, just as the weeds are collected up and burn up, so will it be at the end of the age, right? So he broke it down for us. So that you could add a 4th reason as to why Jesus spoke in parables and everything. And once again, it's because we will remember the stories. People tell those stories, right? he said this, and I don't know if I understand quite what he's talking about, but I remember what he said. And he said this, and then we can have conversations about it and help one another tease it out. So where I want to leave us today, in anticipation of 2 weeks from now, is with the parable of the leaven for the bread. Okay, so this is a short one. This comes. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Now think about that. Remember a moment ago we were told, no, let the weeds grow up around the good plant and everything, and as they grow up, then we'll be able to discern better which is the weeds and which we can take out and save the thing. It's the same thing with the yeast. By bringing the yeast, that leaven, which is the truth, the power of love and everything, and then we're mixing it in with the flour until it's all distributed all around, and then what? You add a little water and you put it over there in the corner and let the bread rise, right? The yeast does its work and bread. So as we contemplate these next 2 weeks and moving through the parts 1 and 2 that we've talked about, in part 3 we're going to be talking about that unified kingdom again. Like, how do we get back to coming from the divided kingdom back into the unified kingdom? So I want to let that parable of the leaven, the parable of the yeast, just kind of germinate with you and think about that. Bring these things in. If we go into when we go into our talk and everything here in just a few minutes, what is it? Think about the divided kingdom. Like, did you get charged when I was reading that language in the divided kingdom thing? I did. I certainly did this morning. The whole Beelzebul and the devil and the Satan thing. It's like, wow, those are words that kind of push my buttons, because like I said, it brings me back into that Catholic orientation that I had. So think about that. The parable of the yeast. How are you sorting through the flour of your own consciousness, bringing in the word of truth, the word of love and everything into that? Are you mixing it up conditionally so that you can make a nice loaf of bread later on? Or are you keeping the yeast separate from the flour, which is not going to do us really any good, right? So in part 3, we're going to be talking about the power of love. Primarily, that's going to be the overarching sort of power that we're talking about, and we're going to be getting back into the kingdom of heaven in part 3 here. So let's just take that into meditation. Just invite you, if you haven't already, just to gently close your outer eyes if you're comfortable in the environment that you're in, especially for the folks online. If it's comfortable for you, just invite you to close your outer eyes. Just take in that introduction. Every heartbeat is God's name to me. Every heartbeat. Every breath of life is ecstasy. Breathe in that ecstasy. Feel your own beating heart. And as you do, you just want to feel that heartbeat. Just say, God. That heartbeat is God's name to me. That kingdom of heaven is within. That is, our source is within. And as we teach in unity, we go into that silence. We go into that inner chamber. We connect with that Christ within. And that Christ within connects us to the field of all divine ideas. The cosmic field of God's power, God's presence is with us wherever we are. We affirm that in unity. Every service. Wherever God is, I am. And all is well. Our work is just to simply connect with that source, capital S, source. It is within. It is with us wherever we are. We can always withdraw into it. With our confusion, our questions, our problems, our prayers, even our blessings and our gratitudes. We don't just bring our needs and wants into the silence. We also bring our gratitude. We allow our love to infuse that space in the inner chamber. in that private room of communication with Source. And as we prepare for a few moments in the silence, we know through our faith, we know through the power of our own discernment and our deeper spiritual understanding that the kingdom of heaven is within, that it is my responsibility to unify that kingdom. And I do not do it alone. God's power, God's presence, the whole realm of God's divine ideas, the energy of prosperity, abundance, healing, unconditional love, the peace that goes beyond all understanding is mine. It's within. And so I go right now into the silence to connect with that truth, capital T. And I say, yes, show me what I need to remove from my life, what I need to release from my life, what I need to renounce and eliminate from my life to allow me to experience more peace more of the time in the silence. As we gently draw our attention back into this space, we know that we can go into this inner chamber. We can take time out in the silence. We can bring all of our prayers, all of our petitions, all of our love into this space, connecting with the inner Christ, which connects us to the divine. So we say thank you, thank you, thank you, living, loving Spirit. We pray all of these things and more in the name and the nature of Jesus the Christ. And so it is. So we allow it to be. Amen.
Amen. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. The light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Yay, God.
Right on.
Yes.
And
All
we're
right.
just